Here's something that makes absolutely no sense. New York City is built on a cluster of narrow islands surrounded by cold ocean water, cut by deep tidal rivers exposed to hurricanes, and is squeezed into one of the busiest natural harbors in the world. Here, land is limited. Weather can be extreme. It feels like geography is working against it, but the more we look, the more it becomes clear that geography is precisely the reason why New York became one of the most powerful and influential cities on Earth. Welcome, I am your host Isaac, and this is Awesome Third Places. The first thing you must know about New York is that, unlike many other cities in the world, it isn't one single landmass. It is instead a puzzle of islands, peninsulas, and waterways that somehow function as a single city. At the center of it all is Manhattan, a long, narrow island sitting at the exact meeting point of two massive geographical features. The first one is the Hudson River, a deep, powerful waterway that drops down from the Adirondack Mountains. It is deep, wide, and naturally navigable. It connects directly to the Atlantic Ocean and stretches far inland. In fact, this river, together with the Erie Canal, which was completed in 1825, acted like a gateway into the North American continent and cemented the place of New York City as a continental and later a global trade hub. The second feature is the East River, which, despite its name, is actually a tidal strait, meaning water flows in both directions, depending on the tide. It links the harbor to Long Island Sound, creating a network of waterways that surround the city with constant movement. So, right in the middle, where those two features converge, is located one of the world's premier natural harbors. The New York Harbor is one of the best natural harbors in the world. It is deep, protected, and large enough to handle massive shipping activity. This harbor is framed by Staten Island, Brooklyn, and New Jersey, forming a kind of natural shield against the rough ocean conditions. This harbor is so perfectly sheltered by the layout of the land that it has been a magnet for maritime trade for centuries. Meanwhile, the Narrows, which are the entrance to Upper New York Bay between Brooklyn and Staten Island, is the same gateway that Giovanni da Verrazzano first sailed through in 1524. Zoom out a bit more and the metropolitan area becomes even more interesting. Long Island stretches out to the east, forming a long barrier between the Atlantic Ocean and the calmer waters of the Sound. To the north, the land rises into hills and eventually into mountains, while to the west, New Jersey provides additional flatland for expansion. It comes as a surprise to many that the city owes this complex topography to the Wisconsin Glacier, which retreated from here about 10,000 years ago. That glacier left behind enormous boulders that you can still see scattered through Central Park. The glacier carved out deep kettle depressions in Brooklyn and Queens, and it also left a glacial moraine that runs through parts of the metropolitan area. But most importantly, it carved out the waterways, the Hudson River, the East River, and Arthur Kill. They're all actually estuaries, drowned valleys that the Atlantic Ocean flooded after the ice melted. This explains why the Hudson is tidal all the way up to Troy, more than 150 miles inland. And as the cherry on top for this wonderful geography combo, there's the famous bedrock of New York. That is the Manhattan schist that we're always hearing about. Let me tell you that, contrary to what many people think, it is not uniform. It is a complex, fractured formation that rises and falls unpredictably beneath the city. Some areas have bedrock hundreds of feet down, in others it is right at its surface. This has dictated everything from where we could build skyscrapers to where we could dig subway tunnels. The city's ancient bedrock provides the immovable foundation for hundreds of modern skyscrapers, but it also created a landscape so difficult that early engineers had to blast their way through it just to lay out streets. Now, this next fact completely changed how I understand the city. What we now know as New York in the past were actually 5 separate towns that merged into a single city in 1898. But the inspiring thing is that they have never really lost their individual identities. The modern layout of the 5 boroughs, as they are called today, is a direct consequence of the water that divides them. First, Manhattan is the hyper-dense core, a narrow island packed with 1.6 million people, and the world's most famous skyline. Its layout is famously a grid, imposed in 1811 when the city planners looked at the island's hilly, uneven terrain and decided to bulldoze it into a rational pattern of avenues running north-south and streets running east-west. That grid turned the island into a commodity, a place where land could be bought, sold, and built upon with predictable uniformity. But as you may notice, the grid stops south of Houston Street, where the old colonial streets of Lower Manhattan twist and turn like a European city. Here you will find Wall Street, the financial district, and the new World Trade Center complex, all clustered at the island's southern tip. Now, cross the East River and you enter Brooklyn and Queens, which together form the western end of Long Island. Brooklyn is massive, 2.7 million people, and its layout is a chaotic mix of pre-car, streetcar suburbs, industrial waterfronts, and sprawling residential neighborhoods. Queens is even larger in area, a diverse patchwork of ethnic enclaves, airport infrastructure, and middle-class housing. Both boroughs were largely developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when ferries and later bridges and subways made it possible to commute to Manhattan. Meanwhile, the Bronx is the only borough located entirely on the mainland, attached to the rest of New York State. Its layout is a mix of dense apartment blocks in the south and more suburban housing in the north. Finally, the borough of Staten Island is the outlier, a large, mostly suburban island connected to the rest of the city by the massive Verrazzano Narrows Bridge, and also a free ferry. Staten Islanders sometimes joke that they live in a separate country. What makes the layout of the entire city truly insane is the density. Manhattan has some of the highest population densities in the Western Hemisphere, with over 70,000 people per square mile in some neighborhoods, and yet, right across the water, in Staten Island, you will find densities closer to rural America. The 5 boroughs are a case study in contrasts. In one stream, it is hyper-urban, and in the other, leafy residential. Billionaire penthouses and public housing towers. All of those coexist in a space of just 302 square miles of land. Now let's talk about the insane infrastructure it takes to get in, out, and around a city built on islands, peninsulas, and a hard bedrock. Getting into New York City starts with its airports. 3 major airports serve the metropolitan area: JFK in Queens, LaGuardia also in Queens, and Newark Liberty just across the Hudson in New Jersey. Between them, they handle over 130 million passengers a year. JFK is the international gateway, a sprawling complex of terminals connected by the air train. LaGuardia, meanwhile, long derided as one of America's worst airports, recently underwent a massive $8 billion rebuild, and Newark, despite being in another state, is considered one of New York's own. Now, trains bring people in from across the country. Penn Station, buried beneath Madison Square Garden, is the busiest passenger rail hub in the Western Hemisphere. It serves Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, which connects New York to Washington, D.C., Boston, and points in between. It also handles New Jersey Transit and the Long Island Railroad, 2 massive commuter systems that feed the city from the suburbs. Grand Central Terminal on the east side of Manhattan is a view arts masterpiece that serves Metro-North Railroad connecting to the northern suburbs and Connecticut. But the real genius of New York transport is how you move around once you're here. The New York City subway is the lifeblood of the metropolis. It is one of the oldest and largest rapid transit systems in the world, with 472 stations and over 665 miles of track. It runs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That's something that almost no other major city can claim. The subway snakes under rivers and through the bedrock, connecting every borough except for Staten Island, of course. Some stations are works of art. Others are gritty, loud, and perpetually under repair. But it moves over 3.5 million people on an average weekday. Meanwhile, buses fill the gaps, especially where the subway doesn't go. The MTA operates over 5,500 buses on more than 300 routes, covering every corner of the city. And let's not forget about the Staten Island Ferry, a free ride that carries over 70,000 people a day. It offers one of the best views of the Statue of Liberty and the lower Manhattan skyline. And in a city so defined by islands and peninsulas, more than 2,000 bridges and tunnels connect the 5 boroughs, each one a testament of the insane geography they had to overcome. The Brooklyn Bridge, opened in 1883, was the first steel wire suspension bridge in the world and remains one of the most iconic structures on Earth. The Verrazzano Narrow Bridge, completed in 1964, spans the main entrance of the harbor. The Queensboro Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge. Each one was an engineering feat of their own time that pushed the limits of what was possible to build. Unfortunately, the port facilities that once made New York the busiest in the world, a distinction held until the 1950s, are no longer the place to find modern ships. Today, most of the container business has shifted to the New Jersey side because Manhattan's waterfront piers became obsolete. And finally, we arrived to this section that gives this channel its name, the awesome third places of New York. Because despite of its density, this city has more third spaces than almost anywhere on Earth, and they are as diverse and surprising as the geography they're built on. Let me start with the obvious one. Central Park is not just a park, it's a 543-acre geographical invention, a massive interruption of the grid that was deliberately carved out of the rocky, hilly terrain of mid-Manhattan. And it's brilliant. The park's designers didn't try to flatten the landscape. The Ramble is a deliberately wild, rocky area that feels like you left the city entirely. The Great Lawn sits on a natural bowl. The reservoirs were built on natural depressions. Central Park isn't just a green space, it's a masterful adaptation to the underlying geography. Then there's the High Line. This is what happens when you take the abandoned industrial infrastructure and turn it into something new. It was originally an elevated freight rail line built on the 1930s to get dangerous cargo off Manhattan. It sat abandoned for decades, but it's now an almost 2-mile-long elevated park that draws millions of visitors a year. And here's what's brilliant about it. The designers preserved the wild, self-seeded plants that had grown up during the years of neglect, creating a landscape that feels both cultivated and wild, a perfect reflection of the city itself. And then we have the new waterfront spaces, the Domino Park in Williamsburg. Built on the site of the old Domino sugar refinery, is a stunning example of what happens when you reclaim industrial waterfront for public use. This park incorporates relics of the old factory while creating a public space that draws thousands of people a day. The views of the Manhattan skyline from the park's elevated walkway are spectacular, and the fact that this space was once a working industrial site is a reminder of how thoroughly the city has transformed. We also have Governor's Island, which is another transformation worth mentioning. For 2 centuries, it was a military installation, first for the army and then for the Coast Guard. It's now a public park accessible only by ferry with 172 acres of public space, historic buildings, and stunning views of the harbor. On summer weekends, it is packed with New Yorkers riding bikes, having picnics, and generally just enjoying the fact that there's a massive public park in the middle of the harbor. Then there's the Brooklyn Bridge Park, stretching 1.3 miles along the East River. It offers jaw-dropping views of the Manhattan skyline, and it's a place for kayaking, pierside lounging, and summer concerts. On weekends, it is packed with families, couples, and groups of friends soaking in the waterfront. Then there's the Squares. Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village is the bohemian heart of the city, with its iconic arch, its chess players, its street performers, and its constant buzz of NYU students. Union Square, further uptown, hosts one of the city's best farmer markets and is a gathering place for political protests and casual loungers alike. Times Square is a different kind of third space, a chaotic, neon-drenched pedestrian plaza that attracts 50 million visitors a year. This is definitely not where locals go to relax, but it's undeniably a place where people gather. For a more neighborhood feel, you have the places like Astoria Park in Queens, with its massive pool and stunning views of the Hell Gate Bridge, or the Boardwalk at Coney Island, a century-old amusement district where New Yorkers go to eat hot dogs, ride the Cyclone, and dip their toes into the Atlantic. Or also there's the street in Jackson Heights, Queens, where vendors set up tables and the sidewalks become an extension of the living room for the city's many immigrant communities. And that's the thing about New York. This city is still defined by the powerful geographical forces that shaped it. And when you zoom out one last time, the whole thing clicks. This city is in fact in its geography. It is performing on top of it. Every river crossing, every tower, every crowded street exists because the land demanded it. New York works because it had no other choice but to become this dense, disconnected, and this alive. This has been Awesome Third Places, the channel where we explore the world's most influential cities by diving into their unique geography, intricate urban layout, and all of the cool third places that a city has to offer. If you want to help me keep the show running, you can do it through a YouTube membership or Patreon. Many thanks for supporting this project. Cheers, guys!